So today we're going to discuss what are the differences between the spoken and the written discourse, and it is divided into general description where we have 7 differences that we are going to discuss, which makes the spoken discourse different from the written discourse. However, towards the end and along the different parts of this lecture, we're going to discuss how these differences cannot be strictly called as differences, and there is a midway where we have to come and we have to decide that it is not exactly on the one side of the discourse that we can differentiate between the spoken discourse and written discourse. Let's start. Grammatical intricacy. Now, the normal view is that written discourse is more structurally complex, and in that we elaborate more than the spoken discourse, which means that the sentences in spoken discourse are short and they are very simple to understand because it's for everyday speech, and that's why we use sentences which are short and more simple. Whereas in written discourse, the sentences are more complex and they are structurally formed in a complex way, so that because it is for the written discourse, and in that you think and you take time. Okay. Now, but if we look at Halliday's perspective, M.A.K. Halliday is a researcher who believes that spoken discourse is not less organized, and Halliday argues that spoken discourse is has a different kind of complexity. Now, if you if you start typing or if you switch on this auto generated subtitles of my conversation, you'll see that it is spontaneous. It's spoken discourse is spontaneous, and you'll see that the grammatical technicalities which are there in the spoken discourse is way more complex than it is in written discourse. In written discourse, you have a sentence structure and it's properly formed, and that's it. However, in the spoken discourse, you have this difficulty, which can be also seen through this transcription of the data. When we are transcribing the data, it's so difficult from the movies and from the from the dialogues and from everyday conversation. If you're from the interviews, if you're transcribing something, it's very difficult because spoken discourse has its own kind of complexity, and that is why we cannot 100% say that this is the difference, but we can put it over there as a difference that in spoken discourses we see that it's more it's not that complex, it's easy to understand. Moreover, it's argued that spoken discourses are large in long in constructions, and because you add up things and there's no proper ending to the sentence, and it goes on. See, I'm using and where the sentence is going on and on and on. However, this is not the case in written discourse. The second point is lexical density. When we look at lexical density, it refers to the ratio of content words that we have in a language or in a sentence or in a text. As we have already discussed text in reference to discourse analysis in the first lecture, so I hope you'll be able to understand it. Now, when we look at the when we look at those content words in the text, we see that spoken discourses are less lexically dense than the written discourse. The content words, the content words are less in the discourse. If we look at the lexical density, now what is lexical density? Lexical density is like the words like, for example, noun and verbs and adjectives and adverbs, they are more in the in a discourse, and in any discourse, or are present there. So we, as compared to the grammatical or function words in any discourse or clause, we call it lexical density. So when we talk about spoken and written discourses, we see that it is like the written forms of the human communication, in specifically in English language. There was a research conducted, and it says that it has typically the written discourse have just typically lexical densities which are above 40%, and the spoken forms tend to have lexical densities which are below 40%. So this shows that written densities are higher in written discourse and is less in spoken discourse. Nominalization. Now, you know that we have seen what is nominalization. Nominalization is something where you present an action or event as a noun rather than as a verb. So we do it by the help of adding ion to the verb, right? So this to nominalize is a verb, but when we add TIO into it, it automatically becomes a noun. So in this view that written discourse has a high level of nominalization. That is, we use more and more nouns than verbs in a written text, and you'll see that normally we start our sentence with a noun. However, this is not possible with the spoken discourse. Now, spoken discourse, it happens that we um, we use more uh, we use more spoken we use when we are using more spoken discourse, we focus more on the action rather than the noun, and that's why our sentences are more active as compared to passive when we are um, writing. So in written communication, our focus is more on the structure of the sentence and the way sentence is presented rather than the action. And in spoken discourse, we focus more on the action, and that's why nominalization is more in the written discourse and less in the spoken discourse, and more in the written discourse. Explicitness, and we already know what is explicitness. Explicitness is when you want to state something openly, right? And when you want to state something um, without any implied meaning or hidden meaning. Now, there's this view that that writing is more explicit than speech. Why? Because speech is spontaneous, and anything that you say will automatically will have its implied meaning, because you don't want to uh, destroy the face value. I hope you know about face, because I guess you have studied sociolinguistics. So if you have studied sociolinguistics, you know what is face theory, or where when you are speaking to the other person, you try to try to make yourself more acceptable towards the other person. So rather than saying something harsh on the face of the person, you try to avoid saying it. But with written discourse, you think a lot and you say something that you want to communicate. So uh, this is what they say, that written is more explicit than the speech. Although, as I've already said, that speech is um, more spontaneous, so this may not be the case. It depends on your purpose of communication, why you are communicating to someone. So speaker can state something very implicit or explicit depending on what they are trying to communicate. Even in written communication, sometimes you say things which are very implicit, very implied, which you might not say when it is when you're seeing someone face to face, or when you're saying something face to face. So it depends, and it varies from conversation to conversation. However, you must keep these 2 points in your mind, that if the speech is used for implicit communication, the reason is explicit communication, the reason is that it is spontaneous and you cannot hide your emotions, and you sometimes spontaneously say things, and that's why it's more explicit. However, if you're going towards the written communication is more, it's considered to be as more explicit, and the reason is that you can openly say it because it won't completely destroy your face value, because you the person standing in front of you, so you're not very afraid of saying things openly. Contextualization refers to the extent knowledge of context is needed to interpret a text. Now, with speech, we know that the context is attached. So even if the structure is incomplete, you are able to understand it. For example, there he comes. Now, in this sentence, if I send it in a written communication, in a written text to you, you won't be able to understand it unless you don't know there he is, or there he comes, or where the person came, um, or what was going on, or who is he. All these words, which are reference words, have some meaning attached to it, and that meaning is more in the context rather than in the words themselves. So unless and until you don't know the context of the situation, context of the sentence, you won't be able to understand it. And that's why a contextualization is more in the speech as compared to the written communication. So written communication is more decontextualized than the speech. However, it may not be the final case, because in written communication, we also have context. For example, you're sending a letter to someone, and you know the person, the kind of conversation you have, it depends on what you have already communicated with one another. And another example of that could be, or another reason of that could be co-text. As in discourse analysis, we have co-text. So text when it comes to written, we have the co-text. When you're reading a novel, it has a co-text, so you understand the entire context with the help of whatever is explained before or after that. So the contextualization, although it is said that spoken is more contextualized than the written, we say that it has both are dependent on contextualization. Spontaneity, the view is that spoken discourse lacks organization and is ungrammatical because it is spontaneous. On the other hand, where a written discourse is more organized and grammatical. Now, it is because it is spontaneous, and we don't think a lot when we are communicating. But when it is written discourse, we organize the sentence structures, we are writing proper grammar, we read it twice and thrice, and then we send it. But spoken discourse contains more more incomplete sentences and reformulated sentences, whereas the topics can be changed spontaneously in spoken discourse, which may not happen in written discourse. You go from sequences to sequence. If you see in the essays, we normally teach students that, or we normally teach people that, you have to, in a single paragraph, the sentences must be connected with one another, and the sentences, and it should go in a sequence, what you're saying. One paragraph should convey one idea, and then the other, and then the other after that. However, it may not happen in spoken discourse. If I ask you spontaneously about your views regarding one topic, you might not write an essay, but your spoken conversation is going to be very spontaneous, and your topic may change from one to another, and you may go back to the same topic. Another point in spontaneity is that speakers may interrupt or overlap when it comes to spoken discourse. However, this may not happen in written discourse. And that's why we say that spoken discourse is organized, and that's why we say that spoken discourse is not organized. However, spoken discourse is organized as well, but it is organized in a different structure than the written discourse, because if it was not organized, then we weren't able to understand it. But we understand spoken discourse way more better than sometimes we do the written discourse, and thanks to the contextualization which is there. So it is, we cannot 100% say that it is not organized. The last one is the repetition, hesitation, and redundancy, which states that you all know that when we are using, what is repetition? Repetition is the is saying the same thing again and again. Hesitation is when you are saying something and you stop, which is done normally in spoken communication through the form of these fillers that we use. For example, right now I said so it's like the filler. The fillers, or we sometimes call them discourse markers or sometimes pragmatic markers, although they all are different from one another. In somehow researchers says that it's a bit different. Discourse markers, pragmatic markers, and the fillers. Fillers are like the way I'm saying, so these are fillers. We take pauses because we are hesitant, and redundancy means that because we are repeating things and we are saying things which may not be necessary. So that makes spoken speech more redundant. Repetition is there in the spoken speech, and hesitation, which is not there in the written communication. This is as it's said. However, it may not be the case. Now, there is this continuum view, and this continuum view is given by McCarty, 2001, who argues that rather than simple one-dimensional difference, that we say that, spoken has this spontaneity, whereas written has no spontaneity. No, we have to divide it on the continuum basis. Now, continuum basis means that you have to make these charts. If you can see this, if we say that there is grammatical complexity, which was our first point. So we say that grammatical complexity with this published academic article is more as compared to the casual conversation. And then when you are communicating, let's bring in this mid circles, let's bring some interview. It's spoken, interview is spoken, but it is when we are giving interview for a job, we think of the grammatical structures carefully, and we form our sentences carefully, and we are even using formal words and very proper words. So we don't we cannot say that for 100% there is this grammatical complexity there. No, it may range from it may range from one point to the other. So so this may be the case. And if you can see this, you can bring it here, or we can take it there. So for example, if I'm sending text messages to my friend, my text messages are written communication, but they might not have grammatical complexity. I may not form complete written sentences when I'm communicating to my friend. So this is the gauge from very formal to fragmented structures. We can say, see, even females send text messages in 4 different messages, not in one single stretch. So they are fragmented, and that's why we say that there should be this continuum. We should not take it as one example, right? So it can be, I've given you different examples. You can take these examples as well, that it varies from published academic writing to prepared academic lectures, or where it's more formal, then informal and grammatical structures are more a little complex than the others. And then we have a letter to the friend, which maybe it's because it's written, so it will be a little, it will follow some rules and regulations, but not a lot of rules and regulations of grammar. And then there is completely casual conversation, which is there in the spoken, and which may not have any grammatical complexity. I hope it's clear. Thank you. And if you have any questions, please feel free to ask.